These numbers must work for you. Natalie, the trust of investors rests on... Brent Douglas, my boss, stated as he slid a folder across his mahogany desk. His corner office's fluorescent lights hummed overhead. My name was Natalie Serrano, and I had worked for 6 years as a senior accountant at Unforgettable Innovations in Denver, as I gazed over the quarterly reports that were strewn out in front of me. I believed I had seen it all in the corporate world at the age of 34. But nothing could have prepared me for what Brent asked me to do that gloomy October afternoon. Integrity and openness were the cornerstones of our reputation as a renewable energy consultancy firm. That's what I thought till that point anyway. I answered carefully, I don't understand what you mean by make them work, even though I knew, well, what you meant by the knot in my gut. 3 large contracts that fell through and unanticipated equipment breakdowns at our wind farm projects were the main causes of the third quarter's large loss, according to the quarterly numbers. Despite the late hour, Brent's pricey suit was immaculately pressed as he reclined in his leather chair. Come on, Natalie. You've been here long enough to know how these things go. We need to show growth, not decline. Our investors are expecting a 15% increase, and these numbers... He looked at the papers with disdain. These won't cut it. As I took another look at the real numbers, my heart began to accelerate. Instead of the 15% gain he wanted reported, we were displaying a 12% loss. Brent, these are the real numbers. I've triple-checked everything. The Westmont contract fell through in September, and the Colorado Springs project had those turbine issues that cost us nearly $2 million. With an increasingly acerbic tone, he stated, then find a way to reclassify those expenses. Move them. To next quarter, adjust the depreciation schedules. Do whatever you need to do. I don't care how you fix it, just fix it. Suddenly, the workplace seemed smaller, with the walls enclosing me. I could make out the distant Rocky Mountains beyond his window, their summits covered in snow that had just begun to fall. I always enjoyed working in Denver because of those mountains, but suddenly they seemed to be silent witnesses to what felt like a betrayal of all I stood for. I can't do that, I answered softly, sounding more composed than I actually was. That would be fraudulent reporting. I could lose my license. Something in Brent's eyes made my blood freeze, and his face grew serious. I was angry that I had the audacity to question him, not surprised or disappointed. This argument was far from ended, based on that glance. Brent was staring at me with barely disguised rage, and the tension in his office was oppressive. I believed I knew him well because I had been working for him for 3 years since he was appointed chief financial officer. I had never witnessed this cold-blooded calculation before. But he had always been demanding and results-driven. Natalie, I think you're misunderstanding the situation here, he responded. His tone became condescending, and it made me shudder. I squirmed in my chair, feeling the pressure of 6 years at Unforgettable Innovations bearing down on me. This isn't about fraud. This is about presenting our financial position in the most favorable light possible. It's what every company does. After graduating from graduate school, I began my career here as a junior accountant and worked my way up. Through hard work and devotion, the company's goal of developing green energy solutions was something I had sincerely believed in. I didn't miss the irony that the clean energy company wanted me to sabotage their publications. But these adjustments you're suggesting would misrepresent our actual financial position, I continued. Brent got up and strolled to his window, where he could see the Denver cityscape. Moving expenses between quarters, manipulating depreciation schedules, that's not presenting things favorably. That's falsifying records. His office was covered in lengthy shadows from the late afternoon sun, and I could see that the light appeared to avoid his face. You know, Natalie, I've been watching your work for a while now. You're technically competent. I'll give you that. But you lack the vision to see the bigger picture. I questioned, unsure whether I wanted to hear his response. The bigger picture? His smile was chilly and piercing as he turned back to face me. The bigger picture is that Glenforge Innovations is on the verge of securing a $100 million investment from Peterson Capital. That investment will allow us to expand our operations, hire more people, and make a real impact on renewable energy adoption. But if we show a loss this quarter, Peterson walks away. My mouth started to dry up. One of the biggest green energy investment companies in the nation was Peterson Capital. Glenforge Innovations would be transformed by a collaboration with them, but not at the expense of financial deception. I said, "That doesn't justify falsifying our reports," even though I didn't mean for my voice to sound so little. Although Brent's smile grew, it lacked warmth. "Think about it over the weekend, Natalie. Think about what's more important, your rigid interpretation of accounting principles or the future of clean energy. We'll talk again on Monday." I had the unshakable impression that I was entering a trap as I walked out of his office. The longest weekend of my life was that one. I pondered what Brent had asked me to do while I sat in my Highlands area apartment, gazing out at the city lights. Phoenix, my cat, seemed to know that I was upset and remained by me, purring softly while I tried to figure out what was going on. My father, Miguel, who had come from Mexico with little except a strong work ethic and a steadfast belief in doing the right thing, was always on my mind. He had 30 years of building experience, and he used the money he earned from backbreaking work and unwavering honesty to pay for my college education. He used to say to me, "Mija, your reputation is the only thing no one can take from you." On Sunday night, I decided that despite Brent's threats, I would not fabricate the reports. However, there was something about his behavior on Friday that unnerved me, so I took precautions. After hours, I drove back to the office building and entered with my access card. When I walked to my 14th floor cubicle, the building was unusually quiet. I carefully copied every document I could find pertaining to our quarterly financials over the course of the following 3 hours, including spreadsheets, internal memos, emails, budget forecasts, and more. I uploaded copies of the encrypted files to a secure cloud storage account I made especially for this use after storing them on several external disks. Call it paranoia or insurance, but my gut told me that in the event of a crisis, I would require documentation of the company's true financial situation. The dreary Denver sky on Monday morning complimented my attitude. I put on my navy blue suit with care, professional armor for what I assumed would be a battle. Brent's Porsche was already in the executive parking garage when I entered the building. He was obviously excited to talk to me. Victoria, his assistant, showed up next to my cubicle just as I was getting comfortable at my workstation. She said, "Mr. Douglas wants to see you immediately," her normally amiable manner giving way to a chilly professionalism. I could tell that news of Friday's chat had spread by the way she uttered it, devoid of her typical smile or small talk. I could feel my coworkers watching me as I made my way to Brent's office. While some appeared sympathetic and others intrigued, the majority appeared keen to distance themselves from whatever was going on. I had spent years working with these folks, celebrating promotions and having coffee breaks with them, but now I felt totally alone. I could see Brent sitting behind his desk with what appeared to be a prepared folder in front of him, and his door was open. In some ways, his expression was more menacing than if he had been visibly angry since it was placid, almost tranquil. He murmured, "Come in, Natalie," with a strange formality in his voice. "Close the door behind you. We have some things to discuss." After shutting the door, I sat down in the chair opposite from Brent's desk, the same one I had been using on Friday when this nightmare started. My name was written on the folder in front of him, and inside the cover, I could make out what appeared to be official letterhead. With his hands folded on his desk, Brent remarked, "I hope you used the weekend to reconsider our conversation." Despite his informal tone, there was steel in it. His expression remained unchanged, but something flickered behind his eyes as he said, "Have you thought about what I asked you to do?" "I have," I said, trying to maintain my composure. and I can't do what you're asking. I won't falsify financial reports, Brent. There has to be another way to handle the Peterson Capital situation. He opened the folder and handed a document over the desk to me, which surprised me. I see. Well, that's unfortunate, but not entirely, he said. If so, I regret to inform you that we must talk about your future at Glen Forge Innovations. As I read the document, my heart fell. The letter of termination was already written and dated for today. Performance problems and a failure. To adjust to changing business needs were cited as the causes. The ambiguous wording intended to shield the business from any wrongful termination lawsuits made me furious. Performance issues? I asked, my voice bursting with outrage. Brent, you know my performance has been exemplary. I've never had a negative review. That was before you demonstrated an inability to work collaboratively with management, he added with ease. Your refusal to work with me on this project shows a concerning lack of team spirit. I gazed at him, at last recognizing him for what he was. This was about getting rid of anyone who could get in the way of his bogus plan, not about performance or teamwork. You're firing me because I won't commit fraud for you? Brent relaxed in his seat, his poise unflinching. I'm firing you because you're too naive for the real business world. Maybe accounting isn't for you, Natalie. Perhaps you should consider a career in education or nonprofit work, where your rigid moral standards might be more appreciated. In addition to being overwhelming, his contempt solidified something within of me. Not only was I being let go, but I was also being written off as incompetent, irrelevant, and naive. He was treating me like a child who had no idea how the adult world operated, even after I had served him diligently for 6 years. He went on to say, I'll need you to clean out your desk and return your access card by the end of the day, looking at his watch as though my dismissal were just another part of his hectic schedule. Victoria will escort you to your workspace and observe while you pack your personal items. I had no choice but to sign the termination papers, but as I did so, I experienced a change in myself. Brent had no idea what he had just unleashed, but he believed he was solving a problem. He said, One more thing, as I got up to go. You signed a non-disclosure agreement when you started here. I trust you remember the terms regarding confidential company information. Despite his use of legalese, the threat was unmistakable. He was telling me to remain silent about what I had seen and witnessed. I nodded in silence because I didn't trust my voice to convey the rage that was swelling inside of me. I gave Brent one last glance before Victoria showed up at the door to take me out. He dismissed me as like I had never been there, already focusing on his computer screen. He was mistaken to believe that this was the end of it. He was unaware that his worst nightmare was only getting started. It seemed like a funeral march as I made my way from Brent's office to my cubicle. Victoria carried her clipboard as she walked next to me. I could feel my co-workers' eyes following us, but nobody said anything. Her attitude was perfectly neutral. As word of my termination circulated across the workplace, everyone on the floor appeared to hold their breath. Family pictures, my favorite, coffee mug with the Colorado flag on it, and the little succulent plant that had somehow withstood 3 years of fluorescent office lighting were all in my cubicle exactly as I had left it on Friday. It felt like artifacts from someone else's life, these personal touches that had been mine for 6 years. Victoria stated, "You have an hour to pack your personal belongings," while looking at her clipboard. I'm required to observe to ensure no company property is taken. Despite my hands working automatically, my mind was racing as I nodded and started to grab my belongings. I was cautious not to show that I had taken anything from the workplace, but the encrypted files I had copied over the weekend were securely kept at home. Victoria took notes on her notepad about everything I placed in the cardboard box while she observed me intently like a security guard. I discovered the business card that Denver Business Journal writer Janet Rodriguez had given me 6 months prior while organizing my desk drawer. She interviewed a few of us at Glenforge Innovations for an article she was writing about women in renewable energy finance. That business card felt like a lifeline now, but at the time I had been happy to portray the company in a positive light. Victoria reminded me, personal effects only, as I paused over a pile of trade journals. Those belong to the company. Naturally, I replied, putting Janet's business card in my pocket while Victoria was preoccupied with a question. It was an unobtrusive, natural, and subtle gesture. As I was packing the last of my personal belongings, my coworker Jessica showed up at my desk. 6 years ago, she and I became close friends after we started working at Glenforge Innovations. The same week. She had a pallid face from shock and worry. She glanced anxiously at Victoria and muttered, "Natalie, what happened?" "Everyone's saying you were fired, but that can't be right." I stared at her for a while, knowing I couldn't tell her the truth, but wanting to do so badly. Not here, not with Victoria watching and listening to every word. I disagreed with management. "About some accounting practices," I said with care. "It seems they felt my position was no longer sustainable." Jessica's eyes grew wide with comprehension. She also worked as an accountant, so she was well aware of the types of conflicts that could result in abrupt dismissal. Softly, "I'm so sorry," she said. "This isn't right." I said, "Thank you," with sincerity. The fact that at least one individual was able to see through the company's performance-related narrative was reassuring. I walked past the conference room where the quarterly review meeting was held as I carried my box to the elevator. Through the glass walls, I could see that the presentation materials were prepared and ready for Brent to show the board and possible investors his fabricated figures on Thursday. My stomach turned at the sight, but it also made me more determined. I had already decided by the time I got to the parking garage. Brent believed that by threatening non-disclosure agreements and my professional image, he had silenced me. He had utterly underestimated me and assumed that I would quietly slip away, thankful to have avoided a major controversy. I was already making plans for my next move as I navigated the traffic in Denver on my way home. I sat in my apartment that night with Janet Rodriguez's business card in my fingers and the encrypted files strewn across my laptop screen. I knew there was no going back, yet the weight of what I was about to do weighed down on me like a thick blanket. When Brent chose to terminate me instead of giving up on his fraudulent enterprise, he had made his decision. I'd make mine now. Janet picked up on the second ring when I dialed her number. Denver Business Journal, Janet Rodriguez speaking. "Hi, Janet. This is Natalie Serrano. We met about 6 months ago when you interviewed me for your article about women in renewable energy finance." Janet responded, "Of course, I remember you," her voice growing warm with acknowledgement. "You work at Glenforge Innovations. How are you?" "Actually, I worked at Glenforge Innovations. I was terminated today." I inhaled deeply. "Janet, I have a story that I think you should hear. It involves financial fraud, investor deception, and a company that's about to betray everything it claims to stand for." The person on the other end of the line paused. "Those are serious allegations, Natalie. Are you sure you want to go on the record with something like this?" "I'm sure," I answered, astonished at my own voice's steadiness. "But I need to know that you'll investigate this thoroughly. I have documentation, but I want to make sure this story is bulletproof before it goes public." Janet's journalistic instincts took over right away. "Can you meet me tomorrow morning? There's a coffee shop called Highlands Coffee on 32nd Avenue. I can be there at 8 a.m. I said, "I'll be there. And Janet, bring a photographer. I have a feeling this is going to be bigger than just one company's financial irregularities." I spent the remainder of the evening compiling my evidence after I hung up with Janet. The actual quarterly numbers, Brent's emails about the need to manipulate the data, and, most damning of all, a recorded voicemail he left for his assistant about the Peterson Capital meeting and how the revised figures would ensure the investment were all in the encrypted files. Reviewing the material, however, made it clear to me that going to the press was insufficient. Since financial fraud constituted a federal offense, Brent would likely attempt to obliterate any proof if he was prepared to fire me in order to conceal his actions. Before he had an opportunity to hide his tracks, I had to call the police. I discovered the Securities and Exchange Commission's online reporting portal while researching their whistleblower program. Although the procedure was simpler than I had anticipated, typing my report made my hands shake from the pressure of what I was doing. This was about more than simply justice or retribution. I was also about perhaps ruining relationships, ruining careers, and revealing criminal conduct that may land people in jail. Then I considered the investors at Peterson Capital, who would base their choices on misinformation. In any case, I considered the workers who may lose their jobs when the deception was eventually discovered. I reflected on what my father had said about ethics and reputation. I turned in a comprehensive report to the SEC by midnight, along with all the supporting documentation I had collected. An investigator would analyze my submission and get in touch with me within 72 hours, according to the automatic answer. My laptop was still open when I went to sleep that night, its screen shining brightly in the dark like a ray of hope. Brent didn't realize that his victory on Monday marked the beginning of his demise. He believed the confrontation was over. The cool October air that came Tuesday morning gave Denver a sense of potential. At precisely 8 a.m., I met Janet Rodriguez at Highlands Coffee with a folder that would alter everything. The morning rush had crowded the coffee shop, but Janet had found a corner table where we could have a private conversation. Janet set up her digital recorder and said, "Before we start," I slid the folder across the table to her. "I want you to know that I've already done some preliminary research on Glenforge Innovations. There have been rumors in the industry about aggressive accounting practices, but nothing concrete enough to report." For the next 2 hours, I took Janet through every document, email, and piece of evidence that demonstrated Brent's fraudulent scheme. "Here's your concrete evidence." With every revelation, her countenance became more solemn, and I could see the journalist in her assessing the story's potential impact and scale. "This is incredible," she finally murmured, raising her gaze from the papers. Janet nodded, her respect for me clear in her face. "Natalie, you realize this could bring down the entire company and probably several careers along with it?" "I realize that," I said quietly. "But what's the alternative? Let them defraud investors and continue operating on false pretenses? How many more people will get hurt if this continues?" Janet asked. She studied my face for a moment before saying, "You're right, of course. This story needs to be told." I considered my father's remarks on integrity and reputation. "But I have to ask, are you prepared for the backlash? Brent Douglas isn't going to take this quietly, and he has resources to fight back." "I'm prepared." I stated that the truth must be revealed, regardless of the repercussions. Grinning, Janet held out her hand. "Let's then ensure that the truth is presented accurately. This story will be prepared for tomorrow's publication." I discovered 43 text messages and 17 missed calls when I got up on Wednesday morning. At 6:30 a.m., Janet's story appeared online in the Denver Business Journal, and at 7 a.m. on social media, it was popular. The headline said, "Glenforge Innovation CFO accused of investor fraud in whistleblower report." My phone rang once more. It was Agent Patricia Wong of the Securities and Exchange Commission. "Ms. Serrano, I'm calling about your whistleblower report. We've reviewed your evidence and we're opening a formal investigation. Can you meet with me this afternoon?" My pulse pounding with a mix of terror and validation, I said, "Of course." Then Agent Wong added, "There's something else. Based on the severity of your allegations and the strength of your documentation, we're coordinating with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. They'll be executing search warrants at Glenforge Innovations this morning." I almost dropped my phone. "This morning, in about 2 hours," she replied. "I wanted to give you advanced notice because there's going to be significant media attention. Are you prepared for that?" I was about to answer when my doorbell rang. I could see news vans already lining up on my street through the window. Even Janet had underestimated the scope of the story. Federal officials had arrived at Glen Forge Innovations around 9 a.m. As FBI agents took boxes of evidence out of the building, I watched the live coverage from my living room and saw my old co-worker standing there looking bewildered. Brent was seen on tape being led out of his office, his hands clearly shaking and his face going white. The on-scene reporter declared that criminal charges were anticipated to be brought within days and that the company's stock had been suspended from trade. In a previous statement, Peterson Capital retracted their offer of investment and reaffirmed their dedication to moral corporate conduct. It was done. In less than 72 hours, Brent's well-planned scam had fallen apart. I came to see that justice was about shielding others from the suffering that Brent would have caused, not simply about punishing him, as I watched his empire fall apart on live television. I know my dad would have been pleased. By refusing to compromise my ethics, I had safeguarded my reputation, and in doing so, perhaps prevented financial ruin for numerous investors. With legal proceedings and career reconstruction to take into account, the road ahead would be difficult. However, I had discovered that often the hardest decision is also the most important. Sometimes burning down the thing that is killing you from the inside out is the only way to move ahead.